Hop aboard the London Underground. We're going to eavesdrop on a remarkable conversation between two women who met on a crowded tube train 30 years ago now, and whose lives have been connected ever since. Guinea Bogle spoke to Asia Fuchs about that journey and the life-changing offer she made to the person she was standing next to. It was a night out with friends, and I was on my way to Piccadilly Circus and hopped onto the tube at Holborn, and there was a child sitting there, and I went in and just held onto the rails above, and he was just really funny. He was just being really cute and quirky and had everyone laughing in that particular section of the carriage. Then we kind of got ushered to one side because more people got on, and there's a woman on the train, her name is Anita, and she was standing right next to me and started a conversation with me and asked me if I had children. And at that time I had my oldest. He was only about 2 or 3 years old, and I said, yeah, I've got one. And I was like, so do you have any children? And she said, well, I can't have children. I've gone through like an early menopause, and the eggs that she's producing, she said, are too mature and they're dying. So she kind of confided in me and said, the only way I can have children now is if a younger woman can donate eggs to me.
It's quite a deep conversation, right? Yeah. It's not like your normal tube small talk.
Yeah, it was a very deep conversation. And the weird thing was, I'd never heard of what egg donation was. I didn't even know. I obviously knew about test tube babies, and I knew about, IVF.
This was the mid-90s, right?
Yes.
This was not as popular back then.
It wasn't. So I don't know how long egg donation had been around back then. And so, yeah, it was a weird moment when she told me, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't know.
And was it right at that moment?
So, weirdly, firstly, because I hadn't heard of egg donation, so a little light bulb moment came on. Like, I was like, I'd love to help someone like that. And that was it. And she was like, would you help me? And I looked at her and I was like, I don't know, I didn't even think for a minute, I think. I just straight away said, yeah, I would help you. I would, yeah. Like that, straight away. No second thoughts to what it could do to me, whether it's a safe method or anything like that. Nothing at all.
Where do you think that impulse came from? Because at this point you've known this woman for how long? Like 10 minutes?
If that, yeah. Holborn to Piccadilly Circus isn't very long.
No.
Yeah.
What made you volunteer to donate your eggs to a perfect stranger?
So it's a weird thing. I've always felt like helping someone because it was just something that I felt like I needed to do. But then when this happened, it was almost like that the two things kind of came together.
And was it something also about, your connection with Anita?
No.
No.
I just had this conversation with this very sweet woman, and I was in for it.
Okay, so what did she say when you said, yeah, I could do this for you?
Yeah. And she sort of said, she goes, well, I need someone who's Asian. And someone who's Indian. You're Indian, aren't you? She sort of said to her. And I said, yeah, I am. And she was like, so I need someone, because I'm actually originally from Goa, and so and my husband is white, so I need someone who has a similar kind of background to me, so a child will look like us, kind of thing. That's what she was hoping. And then the train was coming to Piccadilly Circus, and I was like, oh, this is my stop. As you do. And I was like, how do I
after 800 meters, take the first exit at the roundabout.
She goes, look, I'll get off here and I'll get the next train. So then she jumped off with me, and then we exchanged.
like, no way, you are not doing this. This isn't something that we do. And I think it took me a day or so to really convince him. And I was like, look, we've got one child, we're lucky. And say if we were,
Yeah.
say if we couldn't have any children, we were in a situation of these
Fine.
and you know, what we do.
What on boss?
Nobody came forward. And so I just want to be.
Just two after that
I just
time.
want to do this with someone. That's it. Like, what is this child doing at our doorstep?
Yeah. After that time too.
What are you going to do then? You weren't. Then I explained.
Driving out to Mubarak.
They weren't even being in this country, so you're not going to see it. But it was a very
All right.
mentality.
All the best.
You know, like more people say, well, if I find out we did this, all about, you know, being the first generation here. I think we were protected by parents a lot.
And what do you think made him come around finally? Which of your arguments kind of won him over?
I think I was just like, okay, what you say? I'm not going to do it. I was in for it. I was like, doesn't matter what you say, Paul. You're just going to have to get on board because I can't. I'm not going to not do this. I really need to. I need to do this for someone. A lifetime. And then he kind of, okay, he got it.
And how about the rest of your family, your own parents, right? Come from quite a tight-knit Indian family. Was this something you could share with them? Share with your siblings?
Yes, I shared it with my siblings. I told my sister. They were all okay, but they were still as well. Just make sure you know what you're doing.
What about your parents?
They didn't know. I didn't tell them. Yeah, I didn't tell them because I think back then my parents were very strong-minded and they had a lot of influence on us. And they would have probably talked me out of it or tried to talk me out of it. I think I probably would have listened to them and then still done what I did. But I just thought it wasn't probably the right thing or the right time for them. You know.
And would it have been the same sort of line of thinking as your husband? Kind of what would people
Yeah,
think?
and what would people think? There's always some superstition or tradition that comes out. You know, as we were growing up, parents would be like, no, you can't do this because of this, you can't do this because of this. There would have been some kind of thing they would have thrown at me at the time and said, well, people don't do things like this. Why don't they? And there's always something, you know, to your bloodline. You know, this isn't good. It's not good to give a child of your bloodline because we're very much about being that connected family. And here's me giving a piece of me away. And it was like almost like that, you know, you don't do things like that. It's not a done thing because it's your blood.
How strict was your household?
My household wasn't very strict. Dad was super strict. I think it's because they were the first ones out, and they wanted to keep us protected the whole time. So
Just avoid that whole conversation altogether. You don't tell your parents. And you know, a few days later you get a call from Nina, and her husband's on board and they're all in. You're all in.
They wanted to meet for dinner. Then that's when they explained the whole process to me.
Were you worried about how complicated this could become? That it could become messy?
I did not look at it. I did not look into it. I may have quickly skimmed through something at the time on Ask Jeeves. I think that was what was around at the time.
That was the big
yeah.
website.
And I think I quickly looked at something and
It was kind of like the pre-Google.
yes, that's right. Yeah.
I wonder how did you build trust with this couple, right? Because this is a huge thing.
I would meet Anita regularly, and I don't know. I just trusted it.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, looking back in this day and age, you don't know around. You don't know who you're going to meet. What? I don't know. Something was guiding me. I guess it was something. Obviously, you know, this was meant to be. So someone was pushing me in that direction.
And did you and Anita kind of become friends?
No, this is not Samia Road
Yeah.
for
You eventually donated.
factory maintenance. Is that your name? This is not Samia Road. This is
I think I was 5.
Kuwait Road,
I must have just.
Kuwait or Mubarak Road in Kuwait. Hope that answers your question.
We were just like focused on the end goal,
That was
which
it.
was like helping Anita make a baby. Out of those 17 eggs, 10 embryos
Yes.
were created.
That's right.
But the embryo transfers kept failing. How was Anita doing throughout all of this?
I think she was excited and happy.
But when the transfers weren't working,
When they were working, I think she was just, oh, okay, okay. Gave it a go. I think she'd had 5 failed IVFs by this point.
Right.
It was their last chance kind of thing. But then when she did ring me and told me that one of them did stick, that
last batch.
Yeah.
That last batch of 4. Do you remember what she said and how we reacted?
Yeah, no, she was like, oh, I'm pregnant. I was like, ah.
Oh. How connected did you feel to that little bump?
I think I was tired with the idea of it not being mine, and this was a gift.
When did you see him for the first time?
I think it
baby named Christopher.
Day after.
The day after.
Yeah, I think the day after he was born. Yeah, I held him and I looked at him and I was like, God, he looks like me.
And as baby Christopher was growing up, did you maintain contact with the family? What sort of relationship did you have with him?
On his first birthday, I sent him a toy, and Anita would write to me, and she would always tell me how he's progressing, how he's doing, what he does, and just his little quirkiness and cheekiness as he was growing up. So she would send me letters of everything that he was up to and where they were and what they were doing.
And would you see them when they'd visit London?
Yeah, so
they were living abroad all over the world, right? But they'd come back from time to time.
They would, yeah. They would always come for one night. It was always very nice to see them, and it was always very pleasant. And they would just not stop telling me about him.
Christopher grew up not knowing the truth about your relationship to him, and it was only several years ago, as an adult, that I learned the truth. How did that happen? How did that come about?
So Christopher was told several years ago. They felt that he needed to know, and so they sat him down and explained. He knew that he was from an IVF background or journey, should I say? But what he didn't know was there was a donor involved, and that's what they told him. So they sat him down and said, "Did you know you come from IVF?" And he was like, "Yeah, but what we didn't tell you is there's a donor involved. You know this woman. She lives in London. And can you guess who it is?" Can you guess who it is?
And did he guess correctly?
Yeah, he did. He said it was. After 250 meters, keep looking into I think he did. We just talked and talked about everything. I brought him home and Paul was there. Paul gave him a big hug and he was all, yeah, it's all good. And then he met my youngest son and it was like, hey bro, that kind of thing. You're my bro. Yeah, I was trying to on to 21st Street and then turn right. My mom's sister. And it was quite nice because they got really well.
But still, all these years later, your parents didn't.
Yeah.
And when you first, introduced him to your parents, you said he was a friend's kid.
she was like, everybody knows now. All the kids know, everyone knows, we know, and if you don't tell them now, and they find out right, then you will reach your destination. Very happy for you. You've got to tell them, but I don't think they're going to be too pleased.
After 100 meters, you will reach your destination.
You need it to
Destination on your right.
Pleasantly surprised by their reaction. To hear more, go to bbcworldservice.com. Full interview was broadcast last
You
month.
have reached your destination. It's on your right.
To a stranger on the train. We're going to put on to the railway sidings for now, but we'll be full steam ahead again next Friday when a student doctor from India hears that terrifying announcement over the family. Is there a doctor on the train? And about baby so much fun with his job and he can't keep thinking. See you next week. Today's producer is Pigeon. All change, please. BBC World Service, and now history told by the people who were there. This is Witness History with me, Jill Kersley. Today we're going back to the 1950s and one of the most successful eradication campaigns in scientific history, that of a flesh-eating parasite known as the New World Screwworm. This is the story of how scientist Edward Nippling had an idea to release billions of flies in order to get rid of flies.
I kept thinking, what we really need is some way to control the screwworms before they attack the animals, rather than just wait until after the animals had the screwworm and then try to control it.
That's the late Edward Nippling, speaking to an archivist in 2000 at age 91. The screwworm gets its name from the corkscrew motion of its larvae, which burrow deep into the flesh of living animals.
To most people, this looks just like any other housefly. It is not. It's a killer.
This is from a BBC TV programme in 1992.
In Latin, it is called Papillomaia hominopores, manual, because it depends on live flesh for the larval stage of its life cycle. It is commonly called the New World Screwworm fly.
Edward grew up on a farm near Port Lavaca on the Texas coast in America. As a boy, he spent his days around cattle, cotton fields and livestock. It was there he first came face to face with a pest that would become the focus of his life's work.
I was interested in hunting, fishing, and interested in really all wildlife, including insects. You can't imagine how the outside world wasn't there any way to control a fly like that during people just tolerate it. That's all. And one of the more severe pests was the screwworm. The screwworm would get into the stable of calves when they were born, or pigs, or if there was any wounds on animals. So they were constantly having to look for and treat animals screwworms when they occurred, and that was a very unpleasant task. And you can imagine getting in a hog pen with a sow that has screwworms in it, and then try to handle it.
Those early experiences stayed with him. He went on to become an entomologist, a scientist who studies insects. And by then, screwworms had become one of the most destructive livestock pests in the Americas. Here's why.
The female fly is attracted to open animal wounds. It lays hundreds of eggs in the litter. The eggs hatch into larvae, or worms, which burrow into the wound, feeding on flesh. The larvae grow and enlarge and deepen the wound. Within days, a wound as small as a tick bite becomes a cavity as big as a fist. The animal becomes weak and prone to other infections. It may eventually die. Any warm-blooded animal may be attacked, domestic or wild. Cows, sheep, dogs, cats, even human beings.
When he later joined the US Department of Agriculture, much of the work on screwworms focused on treating animals after they became infested.
Edward thought there had to be a better way.
I realized that you would never really control the screwworm that way. What we needed was some preventive measure. Then I conceived the idea that perhaps we could rear the screwworm and have some genetic deficiency and release those genetically deficient insects into the population. They would mate with the normal flies and transmit detrimental
Now turn right and then immediately turn right onto 21st
I
Street.
figured, well, maybe we could rear these screwworms in large numbers at reasonable cost and actually
Now turn right.
overwhelm the natural population. It all was
After
rather
400
vague,
meters, take the first exit at the roundabout.
these were possibilities.
So the idea, instead of trying to kill every screwworm, why not stop the population from increasing? Edward imagined releasing a large number of screwworms carrying some kind of genetic defect. The breakthrough came when scientists discovered that radiation can sterilize insects. The whole idea depended on one crucial factor, screwworm sex life. Female screwworm flies usually mate only once. If that single mating was with a sterile male, they would produce no young. Once the scientists learned how to breed sterile screwworms in huge numbers, they were ready to find out whether this idea would work outside the lab. The crucial test came not in the United States, but on the Caribbean island of Curacao. A vet in Curacao had sent a letter to Edward asking for advice on dealing with screwworms. Looking at a map, Edward realized the island was the perfect testing ground for his method. Its small size and distance from the mainland meant any results would be easier to measure.
So the flies were reared at the rearing facility we had in Orlando and were exposed and irradiated and sterilized and were shipped to Curacao by air and released by airplane on the island. We had decided we wanted to release the screwworm at the rate of about 1,000 per square mile per week. So that means that we had to rear and sterilize about 170,000 screwworm flies per week. Now that was a major undertaking at that time.
To measure the success, researchers used goats placed around the island and collected the egg masses laid in their wounds to see whether they had been fertilized. This would show whether the wild female flies had mated with the sterile flies released by the program.
Maybe had at least a half a dozen goats in different parts of the island to collect these egg masses. Within about 3 generations, which is what, about 60 days or a little more, it seemed to this one. Now it's been successful against the Mediterranean fruit fly and other tropical fruit flies. It's been used against the pink borer. The Japanese use it to get eradicate the melon flies, and all of these have been beneficial.
Edward Mickling died in 2000, just weeks after giving these interviews. The interviews and archive from the special collections, United States Department of Agriculture, National Agricultural Library. More than 70 years after Edward Mickling came up with a new way to tackle screwworms, the sterile insect technique we commonly use is still being used today, remaining at the heart of the fight against one of the world's most destructive
Flyovers playing here at the BBC World Service. I'm Casola, and this one's over to you. I'll be going behind the scenes to find out. We'll also hear answers to your questions and comments from BBC presenters and programme makers.
Over to you. Sunday at 18:30 GMT. In 30 minutes, Sports Today.
Can Arsenal successfully defend their crown? How will the post-Pep era begin at Manchester City? And can any of the promoted teams start with a win? We'll build up to the new Premier League season ahead of the Champions' first game against Coventry City.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service, it's 18 hours GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the newsroom. Daytime Russian attack in central Ukraine kills 14 people in a shopping centre.
I was driving nearby when I heard the explosion and saw smoke, so I came immediately. I saw wounded people and providing medical assistance. Unfortunately, people remain on the road.
The UN warns the Ebola outbreak in Congo is growing exponentially, after 2,500 total deaths happening in the past 3 weeks.
The epidemic is spreading to an area that is bigger than France, and the outbreak is growing faster and wider than the Ebola response.
Now, AI can help make airplane contrails be less damaging to the environment. And later,
it can be quite challenging to deal with such a large patient. She's 15 foot and weighs just under 50 kilos.
forget snake oil, the python saved by a human cancer treatment. First, our top stories.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. The authorities in Ukraine say 14 people have been killed in a daytime Russian drone strike on a shopping centre in the central city of Kryvyi Rih. Here's our Ukraine correspondent Dan Johnson.
Footage shows the drone diving towards the already burning shopping centre. Despite attempts to shoot it down, it then hit the building. People are reported trapped beneath rubble and rescue teams are searching. President Zelensky, who's from Kryvyi Rih, said the strike was absolutely cynical and despicable. He added the second drone struck half an hour after the first, targeting emergency workers. More than 100 people were wounded, dozens seriously hurt, officials say, and at least 11 children were reported to be hurt.
A senior United Nations official warned that the Ukraine in the Democratic Congo is growing exponentially, with more than 2,500 deaths now reported. Shane Harness, the UN's Ebola coordinator, says half of the deaths have been in the past 20 days. Treasury acknowledges the emergency and manager of the doctors and headquarters.
Every time there is a new case in a new area, we need to have isolation, lab capacity, we need to have decontamination of the houses, surveillance, contact tracing, and most importantly, we want community engagement. And today, that is not happening everywhere where there are cases. And as long as all of these pillars of outbreak response are not in place in every single place where there are cases, the outbreak will continue to spread.
The US Vice President J.D. Vance is in his hometown of Middletown, Ohio, as campaigning steps up ahead of November's crucial midterm elections. Addressing crowds at the steel plant where his grandfather almost 4 decades, he underlined Donald Trump's America First agenda, accusing Democrats of voting to send US jobs overseas. Mr. Vance has leaned increasingly on his Rust Belt roots while promoting the Trump administration's economic policies. Football's world governing body FIFA has Argentina together with 3 of its players and 1 official because of their conduct at the recent World Cup. FIFA also says Argentina breached rules against racist abuse. Here's Manny Jasmi.
Leandro Paredes, a midfielder, is banned for Argentina's next 10 matches, while defender Nahuel Molina has received a 7-match ban. The Argentine Football Association has been fined $321,000 for unsporting behaviour when its players celebrated with the flag of the Falkland Islands after they beat England in the semi-finals, and for discrimination and racist abuse by their fans. Argentina's next match must be played in a stadium only half of which is open to supporters.
BBC News. The family of Pakistan's jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan say they remain concerned about his health, despite hours after being taken to a different hospital to that specified by judges and not being seen by his personal physician. A court in the UK has ordered Prince Harry and 6 other public figures who lost their privacy claim against the publisher of the Daily Mail newspaper to pay an initial $13 million to cover their opponents' legal costs. The 7, who also include the singer Elton John, had accused the Mail of bugging their cars and homes, listening into calls and other privacy breaches. The publisher, Associated Newspapers Limited, had denied all the allegations. The world #1 men's tennis player Yannick Sinner will not compete at the US Open this month because of an injury. On social media, he said he was very sad and disappointed because New York had a special place in his heart. A British woman who's believed to be the world's oldest living person is celebrating her 117th birthday. Ethel Caterham has spent the day with her family and friends, as Rebecca Drought reports.
Ethel Caterham was born just days before workers started pouring concrete for the Panama Canal. In 1909, the aeroplane altitude record stood at just 300 meters. Mrs. Caterham, who was born in Hampshire 5 years before the start of the First World War, says she's had a year of firsts, despite living through a century of monumental technological, political and social change. She held hands with the King when he visited her in September and stroked a llama. She said she was looking forward to what the next year might bring.
BBC News.
Thank you. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with Oliver Conway. Ukraine's efforts to bring the reality of the war home to people in Russia may be working, with drone strikes causing petrol shortages and damaging the wider economy. But Russian attacks on Ukraine are proving much more deadly for civilians. Last month, more than 400 people died in Ukraine, the most since the early days of the Russian invasion. And August could prove just as bloody. Today, drones hit a shopping centre in President
Zelensky's home city of Kryvyi Rih, killing at least 14 people and injuring more than 100, according to the authorities. Bogdan, a local community volunteer, witnessed the attack.
I was driving nearby when I heard the explosion and saw smoke, so I came immediately. I saw wounded people and began providing medical assistance. I helped a man with shrapnel injuries, moving him to a safe distance because of the threat of a repeated strike, and handed him over to the ambulance. There was another strike, and unfortunately people remain under the rubble. A search and rescue operation is ongoing, and we are also still working.
Just before we came on air, I got an update from our correspondent in Kiev, Dan Johnson.
This is a very serious incident. The death toll keeps rising. This has been
described as one of Russia's double tap strikes, where a drone is fired and explodes, causes damage, brings emergency teams to that scene, and then there's a second wave of attack that means more people get injured or killed. And the videos that our team has been able to verify show a second drone flying in, diving down from the sky towards the shopping centre, which is already burning. There's an attempt, it sounds like, by local air defence to shoot it down. You can hear the crack of machine gun fire, but that is unsuccessful. The drone dives into the building. There's another explosion, and some of the images that are emerging from the inside of that shopping centre are particularly horrific and upsetting. We're told more than 100 people were injured, dozens of them seriously, and there are people trapped under the rubble. There are emergency response teams who've gone in that second wave after the initial responders were injured. They are searching the building, trying to free as many people as possible from the rubble. The President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is actually himself from Kryvyi Rih, said this was a despicable and cynical attack. He said the second drone struck about half an hour after the first, and he's just updated his statement on social media saying that he's had a call with the United Nations Secretary General. He says, I informed him about Russia's ongoing strikes and many casualties among ordinary civilians. The UN Secretary General condemned these massive Russian attacks on Kyiv and our other cities and communities. He's referencing the other incidents over the past few nights that have taken the lives of so many civilians and caused
dozens of casualties in the capital and right across Ukraine as Russia has stepped up its attacks using drones, but also missiles, exploiting the vulnerability that is clear in Ukraine's air defences.
Yeah, and this just underlines how many Russian missiles and drones are getting through, even as Ukraine hits warehouses and energy sites in Russia. Where does all this leave the balance of the conflict?
Ukraine had felt like it was getting on the front foot in recent months by taking the conflict increasingly onto Russian territory. The strategy had been to use these long-range drones to target Russian oil refineries, warehouses, distribution and transport networks, to impact the Russian economy, to disrupt supply to the armed forces, but also to make the Russian people feel the impact of this war, not necessarily in terms of casualties. The Ukrainians will say they do not target civilians, but that they wanted to disrupt things so that issues like petrol supply become an issue. The prices go up, there's a shortage, people feel that they can't get the sort of things through the post from Wildberries, that Amazon-like distributor that they would be used to. So the Ukrainians thought they were succeeding in that, but the response being that Russian attacks have stepped up, and because of the desperate shortage of US American Patriot missile interceptors in terms of Ukraine's air defense, Russia has been successful in getting a number of drones through, but primarily the ballistic missiles that fly higher, faster, and are able to strike targets, beating the air defenses night after night here.
Dan Johnson in Ukrainian capital Kiev, and in the past few minutes, Ukrainian state media has reported at least 4 people were killed in a Russian drone strike in the Mykolaiv region. The Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo was only confirmed in May, but it is already the deadliest in the nation's history. UN's senior Ebola coordinator.
The epidemic is spreading to an area that is bigger than France, and the outbreak is growing faster and wider than the Ebola response. And all of this is happening in an area which has had 3 decades of conflict and is generating huge humanitarian needs. The conflict, which has been going on in various forms since 1999, has displaced 1 million people in Ituri alone. The law and order is undermined, and the basic social services, particularly health, have been fragmented. The operating conditions are brutal.
I heard more from our global affairs reporter Richard Kagoi, who's monitoring the story for us from Nairobi.
We've been seeing an increasing number of people who have been infected, which is now slightly over 5,000. And the disease has been detected in 6 provinces across eastern DRC, especially in regions that do border neighboring countries within the East and Central Africa region. So basically the rate of transmission, the pace is a major concern because it has outpaced the response by health workers.
Why is it spreading so fast?
Part of the reason is because this outbreak is taking place within a region that has not got a very significant presence of the government there. So what happens is that this very not so developed infrastructure to support the health crisis. So if you're talking about facilities that can be used for diagnosis and also the number of health workers, it's a very expansive region which is quite underdeveloped, and so even transportation is really a huge challenge. Also the banking system, it's become very difficult to actually process wages for the health workers in that region. That's why we saw some of them really going on strike about 2-3 weeks ago. But then of course there is the perception amongst the local communities who still think that Ebola is a conspiracy. So we're seeing a lot of members of the communities really not going to treatment centers, some of them only going when they're critically ill, and some of them have actually even been attacking ambulances, health workers, and that's really complicated the response. And not also just the fact that there's an armed conflict that is taking place in that region. So the multiplicity of factors that have really made it so difficult to contain this outbreak.
And has there been any progress in terms of vaccine to prevent
people getting it in the first place, or treatments for those who do have it?
Yes, there has been quite some bit of progress that has been made on that end. So currently we have vaccines that are candidates for trials which have been ongoing for the past 1 month. And just on Thursday, the World Health Organization helped to approve the release of about 70,000 doses. About 20 of those doses will be used for clinical trials, later stage clinical trials, phase 3, and about 50 will be used just to support health workers, just to reinforce the response. Based on the WHO's assessment and projections, it looks like possibly we might have an approved vaccine maybe in about 6 months or so.
Richard Kagoi talking to me from Nairobi. A python has become the first snake to be given a cancer treatment normally used on humans. The 4-metre-long reptile, named after the actress Jodie Foster, was given electrochemotherapy to remove a tumour at Chester Zoo here in the UK. Newsroom's Helena Burke has the details.
2 decades ago, a young python arrived at Chester Zoo with the letters JF on her paperwork. While officially the initials mean juvenile female, zookeepers decided it should instead represent the snake's new moniker, and so she was named Jodie Foster. Years later, zookeepers noticed that Jodie was eating less and wasn't her usual snaky self.
The keeper team noticed that she was on her lips. So we removed that lump, but unfortunately when we sent off the tests, we found that it was a cancerous lesion.
Charlotte Bentley, a veterinarian at the zoo, says that although the cancer was removed successfully, 12 months later it grew back on Jodie's jaw.
So we decided to go a little bit to the drawing board of what we were going to do, and that's when we came up with the idea of doing a surgery and combining it with electrochemotherapy to give it the best outcome.
Electrochemotherapy has been used to treat human cancer patients since the 90s. It combines a low dose of chemotherapy with short, intense electrical shocks on the tumour site to help the medicine enter the cancer cells and kill them. The veterinary team had to use 2 operating tables to fit Jodie's long body. But aside from that, Dr. Bentley says the surgery works mostly the same as it does for humans.
It can be quite challenging to deal with such a large patient. She's 15 foot and weighs just under 50 kilos. We have to use anaesthesia to get her completely still, to look in her